purpose of a business school is to serve the broader stakeholder, not just business. And certainly in South Africa, I think businesses in South Africa have realized that if we think about the long-term sustainability, you cannot just be thinking about profits, otherwise you wouldn't have a future market. I'm Jako Volschenk. I'm the head of the MBA program at Stellenbosch Business School in South Africa. So we're right at the bottom edge of Africa. So we are consistently one of the top 3 schools in Africa. I think depending on which survey you look at, we'll be 1, 2 or 3. Our school is triple accredited, so that's quite important to us, especially if we think of mobility of our own students internationally. Again, our MBA program, as with the school, is very highly rated. We are known as a school that focuses on innovation, responsible leadership, strategy. So those are the areas that we have historically been standing out for. In terms of global standards, I think we're small. About 170 students per year would be our intake. So in total, about 300 students. Key feature of our MBA is the international study module. So all our students go into international locations or go to international locations. So that can be from the East to Europe, to America, to Australia, etc. And we were very happy to send a group of students to Cascais, to Nova this year to actually focus on open innovation and the ecosystem or the innovation ecosystem that you have at Nova. South Africa is quite secluded. You're on the edge of Africa. We're a very multinational or a colorful nation. We've got all shapes and sizes and colors and people in South Africa, and we all live in peace. I think in Cape Town, we've got a very strong Muslim community, very strong Christian community. So we've got many religions, etc. So I think South Africans are probably some of the most versatile nations that you will find, also very hardworking. One of the features of MBA is responsible leadership, and an aspect of responsible leadership is knowing yourself, but also knowing yourself in the context of the environment that you're in. So if our students would go abroad for work, and a lot of our students do go abroad for work after the MBA, we want them to be able to function in other multicultural environments. So that ability to understand the context and adapt your strategy for a different context is critical for us. So we not only send students to other business schools globally to see the content. In the case of Nova, it was around innovation ecosystems, etc. But we also want them to understand the context and the culture of the different countries that they go to, in this case Portugal, to understand what is similar, and Vasco da Gama, those guys all came past South Africa many years ago. So we've actually got quite a strong link with Portugal. So it's important for our students to understand if they would one day go work in Portugal, or how would that be different, or if they would start collaborating with companies in Portugal, how can that be facilitated, what are the things to keep in mind, etc. Number one, I think, is the reputation of the school. So we prefer to go with schools that have double or triple accreditation. I would say more triple accreditation. There are exceptions. For instance, if we would take trips inside Africa, to Kenya, to Nigeria, etc., it often would be difficult to find triple accredited schools, but you still would partner with schools that share values, etc., with us. So triple accreditation, a very clear value proposition about what that school can offer. So in the case of Nova, again, innovation. I think the programs you have about data science, etc., was quite attractive for us, just to understand what you guys are doing. If we would go to Rotterdam, it would be around supply chain. If we would go to the west coast of America, it would again also be about tech startups, etc. So we always try to have those two things. Number one is the content of what we want to see and how it dovetails with what we already do with our MBA program. But then, of course, the destination is quite important for us as well. to go to places that students want to go, where there's beautiful scenery. We managed to go to Sintra while we were there on the first day, just as a positioning of Portugal in the bigger scheme of things. So yeah, those are for us the most important things. We sign with different schools every year, or we go with different partner schools every year. So we would not go to the same school every year, but we also give the students some options so that they can choose which ones. So some of the programs won't happen at all because of a lack of interest, but in this case there was quite a good interest in Nova. There's definitely the attractiveness of experiencing a place from a tourism point of view. That's not for us the major outcome. It is obviously for students quite an attractive value proposition. Other than that, just studying here at Stellenbosch, we want them to go to a different country in that. If you're familiar with culture and country culture, you might be familiar with the work of Hofstede, Globe, etc., that looks at cultural dimensions. So power distance, for instance, or the masculinity versus femininity of different cultures, and how does that change the way that you would manage people in a different culture. So I would say, I said earlier, we take the destination like Portugal, so the students are required to compare South Africa in terms of Portugal, in terms of those different dimensions, keeping in mind that they would have a limited experience in the area that we were in Portugal. It's probably one of the higher income areas or higher income regions of Portugal. So keeping that in mind, and the students also know this, how does that change your view of that country? So in terms of the outcomes, it's that cultural awareness, and then in terms of content, there's theoretical content that we want to expose students to. So any program, regardless of whether it's an MBA, that you generally want three things. You want knowledge to be transferred, skills to be transferred, and you want attitudes. And I would say it's on the knowledge one, it's knowledge about the country, it's knowledge about the field that is being presented. You've got only 1 week with faculty members, so it's actually not a lot of time to transfer skills to people, but we did do that while we were at Nova. The students were required to take some innovative idea and bring that to fruition, and in fact they just submitted their assignments on Friday in Teams. And then the third one about attitude is to kind of say, how do you view yourself now that you've been in a different country? What's always really interesting is how the students react to cultural experiences. So in South Africa, we've got a very social environment. I see the very same thing in Portugal as well. We didn't do tapas so much as we would in Spain. So when you go to Spain and you have tapas, then everyone shares each other's meals. And the question is, how does that impact people, how people interact also in a business environment? So there's always something to learn if you go to the East, etc. So in this case, in Portugal, we did experience the people in Portugal as quite friendly, which is very similar to South Africa. So I think there's actually a lot of similarities between the Portuguese culture and the South African one, which in itself is a key learning for our students. Every year we've got about 10 to 12 different destinations. I would say the majority of those go outside of Africa. We do have some in Africa, but as you would find also with students from Europe, etc., if you give students a choice where to go, they naturally go to the places that are probably the most exciting, but also that are very different. So a lot of our students are from Africa, so they're saying, well, I would like to experience something different. Also, one of the reasons students choose us as a place to study is for that international mobility. And when I mean international mobility, it would be to go to European countries or to American or to the East afterwards, after their studies. So I would say roughly about 1/3 of our students would work in a different country 1 or 2 years after their MBA. So there's a lot of mobility. We hope that many of those would come back, but that's a conversation at a different point. As you yourself know, there's quite a lot of mobility out of South Africa, and we are working hard in South Africa to get people back again, which is interesting when Nova started, how the school, and this was one of my key learnings as a school management person, was how Nova succeeded in bringing people to Nova from other countries. If you think about some of the biggest challenges that we face in the world, things like inequality, poverty, climate change, food security, water security, let's call it the global complexities that we will face in the future. South Africa is a melting pot of all of those things. We're the most unequal country in the world. So it's a fascinating context to be in. It's a very exciting context to be in. It's the one of my colleagues would say, it's the water we swim in. We cannot afford not to do our research in that context. There's not a lot of research that we do around luxury goods, as you would find with schools based in Paris, for instance. Ours is based on development finance, those kind of topics. Willingness to pay for green electricity is still an emergent topic in South Africa, for instance. So there's a lot of contextual points of interest that we have in Africa and in South Africa that is of great interest to the rest of the world. So when we do research around motivation levels of people in the workplace, of the four-day work week, things like those, which are all active research projects currently happening, those topics look different in our context than they would in Europe. We're moving towards a national health insurance system in South Africa. Many countries globally have instituted those already. South Africa has got a very unique makeup where if 4 out of 10 people are not actively employed, how do you provide medical services to the whole country without, bleeding the guys at the top? So there's a lot of interesting research that we do in Africa that is very interesting to the rest of the world. The only absolute numbers are relative numbers. So if I tell you, I'm so tall, it only makes sense when you know that other people are similarly tall or taller or shorter. So when we look globally, when you take the African context and you can contrast it, we learn more than what we only viewed one context in isolation. And again, back to the international study modules, we want our students to contrast what they experience at a different school with what they've experienced in South Africa. We are currently busy with a redesign process, and we've had our last redesign was pre-2020, and the world has changed considerably since then. I think the emergence of the things that we wish to include into the future, and which we have included to some extent, is, well, we've been one of the big schools in South Africa driving digital enterprise. So how do companies incorporate AI, etc., into their business functions? My area of study is strategy, and more particularly co-opetition. So how do companies that compete cooperate in certain instances? So don't ask me any questions about AI, but those are, for instance, one of the areas that we're moving into. What also makes our MBA quite interesting is that we've got one of the few online blended or synchronous MBA programs. So our students don't necessarily have to come to our campus, and it's very different to what you have at Nova. Our students, once a week, we've got a 4-hour, two sessions back to back, where they've got face-to-face interactions with the faculty member. You work in a Zoom session like this, so you can have breakouts, etc. And it makes for really interesting conversations, but it's a very different experience to when you've got a full cohort sitting in your classroom. The kind of things that you can do, you can't lecture, you can't afford to lecture. So those are some of the things that we have. South Africa, if you ask people about the Stellenbosch Business School MBA, the thing that we absolutely stand out for is responsible leadership, and secondly, for the aspect of strategy and innovation after that. So we're not a school that historically has been, we're not a finance school. So if you're looking at someone to become an investment banker, this is not the school that they should go to. But if you're looking for someone that are very comfortable with complex teams, team dynamics, what we historically would refer as the soft skills, then this is a very good school for those people. I think we're a very strong values-driven school, but also a values-driven program. So I mentioned responsible leadership. For us, it's very important to know that when the students leave us, that they go make a difference in society. So even the vision of the school is to be a creator of value for a better world. And it sounds very broad, but we do that through the research that we do. So I mentioned to you earlier, we have this water that we are immersed in, that's inequality, climate change, all these big problems that the world face. We've got those. So our students, our MBA is focused on how do we enable people to interact, to act, and to collaborate in an environment like that. So our focus is not so much on employment, but most of our students are already in employment. So it is around sustaining employment, it's around creating employment within companies, and a few of our students go out and they start their own business, etc. But I would say, rather than saying we want people to earn a lot of money, we want people to create value. And if you create value, there's going to be some value shared with you as well. If I look at some of the companies in South Africa over the last few years. In fact, one of them, Capitec, was a company that was created in South Africa, which is today one of the biggest banks in South Africa. And it's become so successful because it's been banking the unbankable. It's been accessing people that have not had access to financial services before. And where people were very much intimidated by banks before, they've managed to speak to that aspect of the market, and they've grown phenomenally. In some of the banking rankings, they've been voted the best bank in the world. So there's quite a famous company. The other one is Discovery, which is a health insurance company that pays for your gym fees to keep you out of the hospital. So they've turned the model around so that they realize, well, it's cheaper to help someone pay to stay healthy than to try to treat them when they're ill. So that kind of shared value model, that's kind of what I mean. Let's go out, make the world better, and in the process, you're probably going to also make money. So our brand promise is that it's to create value, and to create value through our students, and we definitely see in our alumni that mindset.